Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are today. My name is Alex Landa. I'm the head of content here at ODSC. And today it is my pleasure to be speaking with Nick Singh. He is most known as the best-selling author of the book Ace the Data Science Interview, the founder of the SQL interview platform datalemur.com, and he's also an ex-Facebook and Google engineer. His career advice on LinkedIn has earned him over 150,000 followers, and he successfully provided career coaching to hundreds of people to help them land their dream job in data science. And a couple things before we start. So, as you can see here, we have a few upcoming events. We have a meetup coming in a couple weeks in Boston. We have the Data Engineering Summit, which will be co-located with ODSC East. That'll be towards the end of April. And we also have an on-demand podcast, so you can see some of our first ones below. So here's where you can subscribe to our podcast. We have it on Apple, Spotify, and SoundCloud right now. So if you need more data science on your commute, or as you can see, traveling, cleaning, eating, doesn't matter, there's going to be something there. So we are making some pretty good progress with ODSC East right now. We have a lot of speakers announced. The schedule overview is live. So while we don't have the full schedule in place just yet, you can check out the preliminary schedule just to see what we have planned and some rough ideas moving forward. Lastly, if podcasts like this are helpful, which is one of our on-demand training opportunities, we have AI+.training. Here we have a lot of our past conference sessions, more live trainings we've done in the past, and we go into pretty deep topics here. So if you are hungry for more data science in your life, be sure to check out AI+.training. We have free options and paid options, so there's something there for everybody. And with that, I would like to formally introduce Nick. Oh, you are. Sorry.
There we are. Okay, Alex, thanks for having me, and I'm excited to be here.
Great. Pleasure to have you. So first of all, I gave you a quick introduction, but could you tell us a little bit more about yourself and some of your work?
Yeah, I'll just catch you up. I'm not going to start from the beginning, and I'll just say that when COVID hit, I saw a lot of my friends lose their jobs, have their offers rescinded, and it made me and my co-author, Kevin Ho, who was an ex-Facebook data scientist who went on to be a quant on Wall Street, we're just, talking, and we're like, what do we do? We're not doctors. We can't cure COVID. We can't do any of that, but we can help on the economic side and get people back on their feet, help them get jobs in the data industry. We'd seen books like Cracking the Coding Interview and platforms like LeetCode do a superb job for software engineers, but we realized for data analysts, data scientists, it just wasn't there. And since 2020, I've been on that mission and launching datalemur, which is kind of like the LeetCode for for data scientists with a lot of interactive SQL questions. And I've also put out the book. And yeah, just here we are 4 years later, still fighting the good fight and helping people get jobs.
Good. Well, that's definitely needed right now. I know data science and AI is on the top of a lot of people's minds. It's, I know a year ago people asked, what do I do in AI? And now it's ChatGPT, and they actually know what that is. So on that note, since everybody is talking about AI, and there's been a lot more interest from software engineers or all over the place, what advice do you have for someone who's trying to enter the field of AI and data science for the first time?
Yeah. So let's say you've got some good foundations already, through community colleges, boot camps, courses, whatever. If you're trying to just get a little bit deeper into data science and in particular AI, I am a big, big, big fan of projects. And actually, the reason projects are so important is because no matter how much mentorship you have on the job, I'll be honest, when I talk to my friends, like a lot of the work is done by themselves. Sure, when they get stuck, they have someone help them unblock themselves, but a lot of the work is about you independently reading, learning, and doing things. And doing projects is an exact way of kind of replicating that real world data science, AI, ML workflow that you'll do on the job. So if you can do some of those projects at home by following YouTube tutorials or following guides on how to build your own LLM, for example, how to build your own chat GPT, or how to build a predictive model using linear logistic regression, you're going to have a big leg up when it comes to the job hunt. Because even if you don't have work experience, you'll have projects that look like the work experience that they desire. And that makes all the difference during the interview.
Great. That's good to hear. It's very similar to a lot of fields where experience is one thing, but then the proof of concept is really important. I know as a writer, I say I have 10 years experience. People don't care. They want to see an article. So not much different for data science.
Yep, exactly.
So on that, what would be a way for someone to get an interview in the first place? And more so for people who are a career shifter. So someone come from software engineering, what would that look like?
If they didn't, right? They're coming from a disparate field, something else, right? Yeah. So I think what I would advise people to do is, rather than changing up everything in one go, build a portfolio project that leverages your past domain experience, right? So if you used to be a nurse, let's do something in healthcare analytics. Let's look at some open source healthcare insurance data and visualize that in a Tableau dashboard, right? Let's say you come from a marketing background, right? Let's go look at some Google Analytics data, or why don't we try to look at some data that's on Kaggle around marketing analytics and ad prediction and try to predict which users will like which ads, right? Because data science is there in every industry, you will have a chance to leverage your past domain experience and background in that project. And that's will make transitioning into the field a lot easier, right? Because if I'm a hospital and I'm trying to hire a data scientist, or I'm like an insurance firm, I'm going to get 100 applications, but most of them are not going to come from former nurses, right? And that main experience will really set you apart and kind of help you overcome the fact that maybe you don't have the most technical background, or you don't have the most specific data science background. So that's one easy way to get a leg up.
No, that definitely makes sense, because one of the parts that you'll see regardless of job is there's a technical knowledge and there's a domain knowledge. So instead of someone maybe coming in with a data science background but more of a nursing, they can say, okay, I need to brush up on AI, but you don't have to train me on nursing. I can just be plug and go there.
Right.
So now that our hypothetical candidate has gotten to the interview, what are some of the more common or traditional questions that an employer might ask during an interview?
Sure. So when it comes to the technical side, you're going to be asked SQL questions, which is why I built datalemur.com, a free way to practice for SQL interviews. You're going to be asked sometimes some statistics questions, usually not like doing proofs, unless this is like Wall Street quant jobs or really intense ML engineering jobs. You're not going to have any super mathy stuff, but just basic stuff around t-test versus z-test, p-values, things like that. Explaining me a confidence interval, being able to speak to these kind of concepts, or how do we clean data in the first place, walking through the steps you use to clean data, look for outliers, purge outliers. These are all good conversational topics that you could expect to be asked for an entry-level data science role. So you've got stats, you've got coding, you've got SQL. Often you'll also get asked sort of like a half business product-y question and half data-y question. So let me give you a very tangible example. Let's say you're interviewing for Facebook as a data scientist. They might ask you a question like, how would you measure the health of Facebook Marketplace? The app that's kind of like Craigslist, where you can buy and sell used goods. How would you measure the health of Facebook Marketplace? What metrics would you look at? See, this kind of question is not just testing your ability to think about, it's not testing just your statistics ability. It's kind of making sure you understand the business side of Facebook Marketplace, and thinking about the product, and just kind of seeing if you can think on your feet. So if you can think of it as more like, there's book knowledge versus like street knowledge or something. This might be like that more kind of like, hey, what are you thinking about for Facebook Marketplace? So jumping off that example, what I mean specifically is like, sure, you might want to talk about spam. You might want to talk about fraud. You might want to talk about how quickly a seller can sell their good. You might be want to talk about how quickly a buyer gets their good, right? You might be able to talk about how often does someone even check marketplace, right? And these are all metrics I'd want to watch. And of course, in a real interview, they're going to ask you follow-up questions to really test your understanding and just see how you think about the business and product side. Because again, when you're working at these consumer tech companies, it's not just your technical knowledge that's going to help you. It's your ability to reason about the business and the product in the first place that's really going to set you apart and help you make business impact. So that's kind of what a data interview looks like: stats, coding, SQL, product case studies, and of course, lastly, behavioral interview questions, because people are people. They want to work with people they like. And that's a big piece that we cannot neglect. It's not just technical.
Right. And I guess that's where some of the background knowledge might come into place, such as nursing, manufacturing, whatever else. So to jump off that, a lot of the interview things are, of course, going to be fairly evergreen. SQL might not change too much. Machine learning might not change. I mean, frameworks and all that change. But a data scientist is going to be a data scientist. But the past year, we've seen some pretty new big buzzwords of generative AI, prompt engineering, large language models, things like that. What are some of the newer questions that you think an employer might ask, especially since a lot of them seem to be interested in starting with generative AI?
Sure. So one of the big pieces of generative AI is you want to train these LLMs, you got to have the data in the first place. And your data, your model's only going to be as good as your data. So companies will ask to see, do you know and understand about data quality? Do you know how to test for data quality? Have you in your past work experience or projects ever had to deal with a data quality issue? Or did you just throw some random model on the data and then see what's the output, So that's one big thing that I see companies starting to ask about. I mean, we've always known it's about the data, but now as the models get even better, the moat becomes the data, right? So that's one big thing that I've seen. The other big thing I've seen is because of generative AI, is so popular, and a lot of those frameworks, they're not kind of like R packages, if that makes sense. A lot of it's done with Python. So I mean, R has been pretty popular in our industry for a long time, but year by year, Python is gaining steam, and that trend has not reversed. It will continue to accelerate, actually, just because so much of the Gen AI stuff, like, it's so new. And when things are new, they don't even port it over to like R packages or R APIs. It's mostly for Python users right now. So that's another big thing that we're seeing. It's like a lot more focus on Python and Python skills. And then the last thing I've seen is actually companies try to test you on your foundations, your foundational ML knowledge, aka not generative AI. So here's the reasoning for that. I mean, yes, Gen AI is hot. A lot of companies are adopting it, but for every company that's adopting it, there's still 10 companies who are trying to get their data strategy together, who are still evolving, and who are still doing just basic stuff, right? Forget this generative AI stuff, because let's be honest, that's not an application for every use case, Like it is a tool. It's not like a general thing that can work everywhere, every time. So you'll see companies now actually ask you even more about linear and logistic regression, only because they're trying to see how are your foundations. Because did you just simply learn about the latest and greatest and you just don't know where it's coming from and you don't have the foundations? Or do you understand the foundational stuff, which will give you a leg up because all the new stuff comes from the foundational stuff? And this is a quick way for you to test. Did you get in the field in the last 6 months? Or have you been at this for a little while and you've seen how things evolve? Because then you'll be a lot more mature as a problem solver in their business when you have that good, strong foundation.
Good. Glad to hear that all of the basics are still quite relevant. But it makes perfect sense that, some people might hear prompt engineer and think all that means is going into ChatGPT or Bard and asking the right questions, which is part of it. But at the end of the day, you're going to be working with, proprietary LLMs, things like that are going to need fine tuning. So going to be more than just talking to a chatbot.
Yeah, that's that. I think that's just like a marketing hype type thing, or like maybe one person was hired with that title and then everyone's like, oh, is this the newest job? But the folks being hired as prompt engineers are like very deeply technical, because It's not just a job where you're just prompting stuff all day.
If it was, I think that would be my career shift of, oh boy, I
Yeah.
just have to
Yeah.
make pretty pictures by talking to a chat bot all
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
All right. So now that we've had the initial interview or the first pre-screening, whatever, what would someone expect to see as the series of interviews?
Yeah.
So I think every job is rarely is a job going to be just one interview. You have
Oh,
the recruiter pre-screening and then talking to 6 people of the team, maybe the
yeah.
CEO. What kind of interviews would someone see as part of the process?
So I think, yeah,
Assessment and things like that.
yeah, absolutely. So I think after a phone call with a recruiter or the hiring manager, just a quick 20-30 minute thing where it's mostly behavioral or maybe just barely a technical question, you will often get 1 or 2 technical interviews. Sometimes these are done live. Other times they're done through assessments like HackerRank, Codility, CoderPad, where they're trying to test you live on SQL or coding. That's exactly why we made Data Lemur, for these interactive SQL and coding type questions where there is a time pressure and you have to code. So usually after you do 1 or 2 of those rounds and they know that you have some of these basic hard skills in SQL or Python, then you may move on to the on-site rounds where, again, they're going to test you on a little bit more coding. They're going to ask you some of these more product and business type questions. And they're going to, look for behavioral interview and team fit stuff. Somewhere there, maybe after the on-site or before the on-site, or maybe as part of the on-site, you may get like a take-home challenge. But again, if it's on the on-site, then it's not a take-home challenge. It's just sort of like a project you have to do for 2-3 hours where they'll give you a data set and ask you to find an insight or two. So again, the crazy thing about the world of data is this stuff is not standardized. Every company does things differently. Roles do things differently. And so it's really hard to talk in generalities. But from having coached a lot of people, this is just the generic blueprint. So the orders might change, but the actual skills being tested are almost always the same, of SQL, Python, a little bit of stats, and some of this business product sense mixed in.
All right, good to know. So now that someone has had this series of interviews, or at least one, what can an aspiring data scientist do to follow up with the interviewer and the company itself?
You mean after the interview's done?
Right, like
Yeah,
a letter or send a
sure.
portfolio, anything like that?
No, I think just sending a good email right after the call, like, hey, thank you for your time. Really enjoyed talking about X, Y, and Z. I think that's a really good thing to do. But actually, I think a lot of this game is not about the follow up. It's about the pre work. It's about what you do before the interview, not what you do after the interview. So, before the interview, of course, you're going to practice a ton of questions from the book or Data Lemur or whatever. But you should also, for the specific company and role, look a little bit into that company and see their engineering blog, read a few articles, look up your interviewer on LinkedIn, see what their background is, see what kind of work they already do, so that when you're in an interview and you're talking to them, you can relate to them a little bit better and say, hey, Alex, I saw you used to be a content writer before you got into data. I love writing. How's that transition been? Or, hey, Alex, have you thought about technical content writing? I love putting out SQL tutorials. I'm curious, have you ever done tutorials or anything like that in your company or as part of ODSC? This is one way where the interviewer can subtly be like, oh, wow, this guy did their homework. This guy knows something about me. This guy took an interest in me, right? And same way, when you read that company engineering blog, you learn a little bit more about their products. You're going to have a lot better conversation during the interview process. And finally, here's the other big value add of doing this kind of company specific research. Remember I mentioned earlier that you might be asked about product metrics or something kind of businessy or producty? Well, if you're interviewing at Facebook, they're not going to ask you a question about Lyft or Uber. They're going to ask you about Facebook, right? So if you're familiar with the company and their products, that's going to give you a leg up when it comes time to talk and think about the product. Now, at Facebook, this is a little bit easier because their products are quite ubiquitous. But if you're interviewing at some kind of niche company, like that's doing lead scoring for enterprise sales, they're helping enterprise salespeople prioritize which people to talk to and assigning scores in the CRM, in their software that salespeople use. You'd want to come into that conversation knowing what is lead scoring, what is Salesforce, what do salespeople care about? What might be some factors that help you rate whether a customer is a good person to go after? Maybe you know that their company has a lot of money, or their company is a very large company, or maybe their company is very small, which means they'll move fast. You'll want to have this kind of domain and business knowledge before you ever step in to the interview, because inevitably, when they ask you that open-ended question, it's going to relate to their company, and having that leg up from the homework is going to make a big difference.
Right. So it seems like a lot of understanding some of their pain points, what they're about, their industry. It sounds like a pretty universal thing, regardless of what job it's going to be. It's
It
a little less
sounds
about.
universal, Alex, and that's because of your background. You've been around the block, you've done stuff. I talk to so many people for whom this is not obvious. They're fresh out of school, or maybe they don't have that business background. I mean, Alex, you mentioned you have that writing background, so you know about know your audience or write for your audience. A lot of data people are like, don't even think about that. They're like, oh, I learned a lot about the latest and greatest in ML. I should be able to crush it regardless of the company. And it's like, wait a second, it has to be applied for the company. So you should probably know who you're talking to. So you'll be surprised, Alex, at how many people mess this up, even though it sounds obvious to you and me.
No, I never really thought of that, but I guess it does make sense of, when you've had a few jobs, those questions, those things, but I guess a fresh undergrad with a nice new degree, they might just think, all right, here are the frameworks I learned, but not necessarily. So a little less, here's what I know, and a little more so, here's what I know and how it can help you. Here's how I'm valuable.
Exactly. And the ultimate thing, right? So now I run my own business. I've been around the block. I've helped a lot of people. I've seen some stuff. Now I don't even care about what do I know. I say, what are your problems, Alex? Right? And that's all I need to do. And based on whatever your problems are, I will then go do research on how I can help you and fix those problems. Some of them I may be able to help you now. Some of them I might need to study up or hire someone or ask a friend or a consultant. But now I don't even say, oh, here's what I know. I'm just like, tell me your problems, Alex. Tell me how I can help. And I just listen, right? So this is like the more senior end of the world, not end of the world, senior person or maybe entrepreneur mindset. But trust me, when you're in the undergrad, you're like, how can I help? I'm like, I don't know how I can help, but I know Postgres and I know MySQL. I mean, and they just lead with the skills and technologies they know, so.
Right. And there's going to be competition, plenty of people who know those skills. So it's probably going to be, here are the skills I have, and here's what separates me with these case studies or these problems directly.
Exactly.
So we're making good timing. So I think we can probably answer some of the questions we have. Let's see. So we got one from George. For those who aren't technical, such as writers, marketers, etc., which skills should they focus on first if they're interested in the generative AI field?
This is a very hard question because generative AI is leading cutting edge technology work. So if we don't even have any foundation, it is hard. It's like saying like, I don't really play basketball, but what should I do to make the NBA? It'd be like, bro, you're 28, you don't play basketball. NBA is a little bit hard. Now, of course, generative AI, it's not at the level of the NBA. You know what I mean? So the floor is a little bit lower, but I think I would just start with learning a little bit about coding, learning about Python, for example. And if Python is crazy and really scary to you, just get good at Excel, right? Like start with Excel, learn the basics there, and then go to SQL. Because if you know Excel well, you should be able to understand SQL. Like don't even worry about generative AI. That would be my first step if you're trying to make it in. The other advice is, hey, if you mean how do I get interested, like more into generative AI without actually being the person to make these generative AI models, well, go adopt these Gen AI tools. That would be the other thing, which is like, hey, don't worry about the coding or anything like that. If you're a writer interested in Gen AI, let's make sure we've used all the different Gen AI tools for writing and you understand about prompt engineering. And you can think a little bit more creatively around, okay, if I had this magic black box that can write me stuff, how can I use that productively in my own writing job for the newspaper or for a blog or for the marketing department, So, different answers depending on what what you mean by how deep you want to go into Gen AI.
Right. So maybe it's the NBA analogy is great of you got to know how to dribble before you can get into the major leagues.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Got another, probably an easier one to answer from Aaron Walsh. What advice do you have for entering data scientists with no programming background? I've never used SQL, but I've studied and used Power BI and some Google Analytics, as well as DBAAS interface.
Cool. Yeah, I would say go learn SQL. I think we'll drop a link, but there's like a free SQL tutorial on the site datalemur.com, which I think it's been already used by 25,000 people. The free SQL tutorial, even though it's only a few months old. So definitely check that out. I don't know what to tell you because I mean, this is a programming related job. So it's amazing that you know Power BI, you've played around with Google Analytics. I think knowing SQL is like the next best step. And I think deep down, Aaron, you know that too. That's why you wrote, I've never used SQL. And then you said what you have used. I think you also know that the next step might be play around with SQL a little bit. And you'll see that SQL connects to Power BI. You'll see that Google Analytics data can be exported really easily to Google BigQuery, which allows you to write SQL queries to kind of analyze that data. So you're like already basically there. You're like very close. Let's just go learn SQL, and that will connect nicely with Power BI and Google Analytics as well, which is the best. When one thing you know helps you with other things, or they're all related and they can be combined together, that's when you start getting really powerful.
Well, Aaron, it sounds like you have a decent foundation to start with. So it's not too bad there. All right. Got a question from Buster. If we have personal projects, how do we properly promote these to potential employers?
Yeah. Biggest thing is have a link to the project. It's so amazing how many people will forget this or not realize this. You need to have a link to your project. Even if it's on a resume that's printed out, you know, you're at a career fair, you're at a networking meetup, and they can't click up project, right? Because it's a physical piece of paper. That blue hyperlink that says view dashboard here, or that blue hyperlink that says public Tableau dashboard here. Even though they can't click it, they already understand, oh, wow, this person said they did this and they actually really did it. I mean, there's an underlying link right there. I'm sure it's something, you know what I mean? So that's a huge thing. And then conversely, I'll hear someone talk about like, oh, I did this and this and this and this and this with 500 users or 1,000 users, and there's no link. And I do a Google search, nothing comes up. I'm like, what? Is this real? Like, if you did all this, you'd at least have something, right? Something would come up on Google, right? Like how do you claim to have done all this and there's just like nothing to even show for it? It makes me skeptical. So just having a link to your project is best. The best thing you can have is it's live, you know, like a real app, a real dashboard, you know, and public Tableau allows you to make public Tableau dashboards. So it's quite easy there. The next best thing is like a GitHub repo or a write-up, which you can host on Medium, for example. Yeah, but really wherever we can do something live or something visual or something where I can like just in 10 seconds see that, oh yeah, this person really did what they said they did, that's the best. So if you are going to go the GitHub route, make sure there's a GitHub README and make sure there's an image or two right at the top. I don't want you to link me to a GitHub repo where there's 48 files and I don't know what is what, and I don't have any more information. You know what I mean? Because then it's like, great, you did your project, but it's also like, well, what's the so what? Or like, you know, what does it actually look like? Or how does it help me? All I see is like 48 files. I don't know which ones to click in. And yeah.
Right. I mean, that makes sense of the show, don't tell mentality, or even going a step beyond and have something interactive to see this is something tangible this person made, and here's how it can relate to what we do and what we need.
Yeah.
Okay. Got time for a few more questions? Looks like we have quite a few more, actually. So
good.
Start from the top still. All right. We have another. Let's say I am already familiar with basic Python. Will employers test more advanced knowledge, such as PyTorch, TensorFlow, etc.?
Honestly, not really. Not often. Sometimes they might ask you just at a high level, but Not really during the coding interview. They're going to be just testing your basic data structure and algorithm skills. They're going to see if you know pandas or if you can do some data cleaning and wrangling, but they won't ding you if you know PyTorch, but they're looking for TensorFlow or vice versa. They're not going to ding you for that. What they will do is if you have listed that on your resume, maybe you listed that as a skill or you have a project where you used PyTorch, I'm going to ask you, hey, nice project. How did you like working with PyTorch? What difficulties did you have? And for you, you could be like, I don't know. It was really good. Right. And then someone else, they're like, oh yeah, I used TensorFlow. It was really painful, but then I migrated to PyTorch. Here's 3 things PyTorch did better than TensorFlow. So I'm really glad to move over to this. Plus, PyTorch also hooked up really nicely with X and Y and Z, but TensorFlow didn't play nicely because I think that it's fallen behind. That is a much more informative answer without me even testing you, like, do you know XYZ feature of TensorFlow? That's a much more informed take on TensorFlow or PyTorch, right? Versus people who are just like, I don't really know. I used it once. I don't know. You know what I mean? So that's like how it might be tested. It's more like conversationally.
Great, makes sense. And I'm sure a lot of it might be if you know one, you can probably learn another.
Yeah.
So they might not be needing to understand how deep you can go as much as it is, do you understand this sphere?
Yeah.
Or if you understand this type of framework, but we don't use that, can you learn this?
Yep.
Okay, well, we have a question about data lemur. So it's pretty good for SQL. Can you suggest some resources to practice Python and stats for interviews?
Perfect. So I admit the Python part is a little bit lacking. So LeetCode's pretty famous for their Python offering. So I'm still trying to catch up on data lemur. Also, the book has a bunch of statistics questions. I think 40. And these are like kind of curated. So here it's not the volume that matters. They're all fully solved and very well curated. So usually that's more than enough practice for most people. Because even if you did half the problems in the book, you're ahead of like 90% of people when it comes to interviews. Because I mean, it takes a long time to do these problems. So yeah. Let me try to answer another question that I saw. Sure. Someone actually, why don't you find a question?
So there was one I liked. Okay. So one from Don Joe on Facebook. Sounds like he's having some difficulty getting an interview. He's applied every day for at least a month. He's applying for data analyst jobs as well. So I guess the bigger question there is, what are some problems that people do to not even get an interview in the first place?
Yeah. So again, I need to know more about your background, Don, to really triage this. But I would say that the market is really tough right now. I am by no means trying to make it seem like it's easy or any of this is easy, especially right now, because we are in a tougher time in the tech cycle. That being said, given that you have 5 years of experience, right? It might be a resume issue. I've seen some really smart people make some really weird resume stuff. I put out some free resources about how to do resumes and I offer one-on-one resume coaching if you ever want to look at that. Let me give some more generalizable advice. It says that you've been applying for a month and haven't gotten a single interview. It takes people months to get this through. That's one thing. And I know that some people think applying to 30 companies is a lot, but I think I've seen people have to apply to like maybe 80 to 100 companies to get one interview. That happens for folks. Maybe a little bit less for you, Don, because you have 5 years of experience. But I mean, if even just 50 apps leads like one interview, I mean, that really looks like you have to apply to like 200, 300, 400 jobs to even get 3 or 4 interviews, which might convert to maybe one on-site, which maybe converts to a job. So it is a numbers game. The other part is that it says, I cannot relocate and I live in Philly. Well, Don, have you ever met data scientists who live in Philly already? Because yes, this might be a weakness, Don, that you can't relocate. But on the flip side, if you are able to go to meetups hosted by data analysts, data scientists, or conferences in Philly, and mind you, Philly's a big place, right? Or you go to the healthcare or pharma data science meetup, because I bet you there is one. because I know there's a lot of pharma companies out in Philly and Pennsylvania generally. Those companies might also be having their problem of, oh, I'm looking for people, but no one wants to relocate to Philly. If only I could find someone who's experienced, who's in Philly, who's happy to be in Philly. You know what I mean? So that's the other piece, which is like, okay, if your constraint is you can only be in Philly, well, let's use that to our advantage and go meet one Philly data scientist a week and just try to network and go to as many events as you can.
Yeah, I'm sure there's plenty of little meetups from tech companies.
Yeah.
We have them in Boston, but Philly's another big city. I'm sure there's something there for you.
Absolutely. Meetup.com is great. And people are ready to help you if you write a good cold email message and you're good at cold email networking. People are willing to help you, especially if you can connect with them in a previous way, such as, hey, I see, you mentioned that you're coming from a different country. If you find other people from the same country who are working as data scientists in your area, you're going to be willing to help you. Hey, I'm a fellow Filipino. I'm a fellow Indian who's just new to the country, who's just moved here working in data science. Can you help me out? People will meet you for a coffee.
I feel like people are generally going to be pretty nice and open to
Yeah.
that kind of
Yeah, exactly. So whatever kind of inroads you have, whether it's your nationality as your inroad, maybe it's like, hey, you studied mechanical engineering and you're now trying to do data science. Well, I bet you there's some people like that too in Philly, who have had that past experience where you can go right to them and say, hey, Alex, I saw you studied mechanical engineering, but now you do data and you're in the Philly area. I'm trying to make the same transition and had a few questions, this. I'd love a response on email just because I think you've been where you're a year or two ahead of where I want to be. You've already seen these problems. / if you're down for it, I'd love to buy you a coffee in case that's easier. People will be like, oh, dang. Just even offering to buy you a coffee and saying that, hey, Alex, you're where I want to be in a few years and I'm following a similar path. It's hard for me to be like, no, screw you, man. I don't want to talk.
There's one thing I've learned is people generally like to talk about themselves.
Yeah.
So people like to talk about themselves, and if they get a free coffee out of it, offer advice to someone, I think you'll get a number of people that will say yes to that interview request.
As long as you have done good work yourself and you're leading and you're writing to the right person, you're not just saying, hi, Alex, do you have a job for me? You're saying, hi, Alex, you are a content writer switching to this. I'm trying to do data journalism. I saw you used to be a technical content writer at MIT. I'm trying to make a similar transition into data journalism and at the intersection of writing and data viz. Can we chat? Because I think you might have some leads for me. You're gonna feel for me, and you're gonna be like, oh, this guy did my research on me. Not that I stalked you out for this interview. Not like that.
You're allowed to. I did the same.
Yep.
All right. How about one more question, and then I want to ask about your book.
Yep.
All right. So, what would be your advice to deeply technical, such as C++ software engineers, but lacking in the math statistics side? I am trying to get a machine learning job for a few years now, but I always end up in DevOps instead.
Yeah, I saw that one as well. Two things is, okay, if you have hardcore C++ experience, see if you can start contributing to some of these frameworks where deep down they're written in Rust or they're written in C++. That might be your angle in, right? You might not just be like a data scientist, but you might be someone who is working on data infra or at a lower level supporting these projects. So that's one good way, especially if you're deeply technical and experienced as C++, because there's a lot of people in data who just don't know C++ or like don't have the skill set for memory management that you might do because you're a C++ person, right? That's one thing I would advise you, which is like, hey, who says you even had to do normal data science work to be involved in this field? The second one might be, there's a few books that I really like. One is called Practical Statistics for Data Scientists. That's a great book because it talks about statistics and teaches you statistics with code in Python. And it's not like the theoretical statistics. It's not like a textbook that you're going to use because you have to pass a course in college. It's like for the field. Then there's also another book by O'Reilly called like Learning the Math Behind Machine Learning. That's another place to get the foundation. And lastly, the job of ML engineer is 80% coding, 20% ML data science type work. I know it might seem 50-50, but there's a ton of companies where ML engineers look a lot more like a software engineer with a little bit of math, stat, data, ML knowledge. So go try to find those roles because there are actually a lot of them there. And I think someone, I can't remember who, but someone very high up at OpenAI, maybe it was their CTO, Greg Brockman, or someone else. They said something like it's easier to teach a really good software engineer about ML than teaching someone who knows a lot about ML how to be a good software engineer, right? Because things like code cleanliness, code organization, or like collaborating with software teams, these are things that don't have anything to do with stats or ML that are often bottlenecks for these ML projects. It's not like, oh, the guy didn't know linear algebra and that's the bottleneck. The person did not know, the ins and outs of regression and that's the bottleneck. No. Often the bottleneck's on the software side. We have these pipelines that keep breaking. How do we alert people to the breaks more frequently? Or, hey, we have 50 people trying to edit a repo at the same time, and some of our code's deprecated. How do we, reorganize our code while not slowing down the 50 engineers, right? That's a software and people problem. That's not an ML problem, right?
Mm.
And this is what keeps happening in the industry, which is why going back all the way to one of my older questions of how do we do this Gen AI stuff without knowing coding? It's like, well, you got to know coding. That's often the bottleneck, and there's no way around that.
All right. So looks like we have a lot of questions, but maybe we can do a follow-up email with
Sure.
a lot of these. Otherwise, we might be here for
Yeah.
another hour.
And Alex, from seeing some of the questions that we haven't answered, I hate to be doing a shameless plug for my book, but a lot of these are answered in the book. It's 301 pages, and a lot of the questions I see here are basically answered in the first 4 chapters of the book, which are all about kind of the job hunting career stuff. The back half of the book is technical with questions, like interview questions and their solutions, but the first half is more of this career stuff. So, I don't want to go all professor on you of read the syllabus, but
Well, that leads me to my last question of why should everybody that are asking these questions read your book?
I think the book's pretty good. There's going to be typos in the book. I'm not an English person. I did not go to school for English or writing or anything like that. Me and Kevin, we're both technical, but I think what you're going to like in the book is we keep it real. We're not corporate shills. We're not recruiters. We're not trying to sell one company or, say something nice. We're just trying to help people get jobs. And you'll see that reflected in the advice we give, which is all very tactical, not feel good, pat yourself on the back. We all have a place in data. It's very specific. Do this, followed by this, So that's one thing our readers appreciate. The other thing is it has helped a lot of people. We've now sold 30,000 books. We have about 980 reviews on Amazon and just countless stories of people using the book to improve themselves. It's not the book to learn data science, but if you have some of these foundations in coding, in SQL, in stats, and you're actually trying to get interview ready, it is exactly the only book out there in the market that does that, the interview ready part. Because a lot of people will teach you, but we're not trying to teach you anything in the book. We're trying to just get you practice.
I will say I did take a look at it on Amazon, and it's very highly rated. So not necessarily to sell it, but at the same time, people like it. It does seem very helpful for all these questions. So
Yeah. People like it, but I know some people don't like reading, which is why we put out Data Lemur for these interactive SQL interview questions. And you'll see 100+ questions for free on Data Lemur. So in case you don't like reading books, or you want that more interactive SQL interview practice, or you're in a country where the book's not available, you can always check this out on Data Lemur, where there's 100+ questions for free, including questions from the book. Not all of them, but some of the questions from the book are there for free on my site as well.
And we just linked that right here to datalemur.com/questions. So there you go. It's probably a good starting point for a lot of these questions.
Yeah.
And I guess before we wrap up, any closing comments or resources people should check out?
No. I think a lot of good questions. I think just hang in there. Like in the micro point right now, it is tough in the tech industry, and it's so easy to be like, God, nothing's working out. But at the macro sense, like, hey, you got to work for 20, 30 years. Do you want to do it in a career you don't like? Or do you want to do it in a career you do like? Do you want to do it in an obsolete career? Or do you want to do it in a career, an industry where it's the future? So in the next weeks or months, it's going to be painful, or learning is always painful. Growth's always painful. But 5, 10, 20 years from now, you're going to look back and be like, oh, I'm so glad in 2024, I got into the field that I thought would be the future, and it turned out to be the future. You know what I mean? You're going to be happier to hear that than 2024. I saw the future coming, and it was a lot of work, and I just, didn't chase my dream. So it's not easy, but we got to chase. We got to chase it.
Definitely agree there. Well, we do have more questions, but I'm sure we can answer some of these in a follow-up email that we will be doing. We will be providing the recording to this if you joined us late or wanted to listen to some of these answers again. But again, Nick, thank you so much. It has been an absolute pleasure having you, and I'm sure people will be listening to your advice. And of course, best of luck to everyone in this data science job hunt.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Have a great Friday, everybody. Catch you
Thank
all
you,
later.
everyone. Bye now.
Bye.